First off, Jacob Prater and I have been organizing this event for the last 6 months or so, and to be honest, we're really proud to bring this event together tonight to talk about the Farm Bill and its implications for conservation. We couldn't have done this without the Ralph K. Morris Foundation. William Nelson is the chair, or the board chair for the foundation. But to be honest, I'd like to recognize Bill Berry, because Bill has been an integral member of this team pulling this together, including helping us, call and recruit people to come in and have this conversation. It's really been a wonderful experience. This is a great group of folks, and so I see some folks that we borrowed from the Lakes Convention are here tonight. I see a number of my students filling up an evening event, which we're told nobody shows up for. And then even better, I see a number of community members that I know are passionately involved in conservation and agriculture, and it's wonderful to bring all of you here together tonight. At this point in time, I think those are most of the thank yous that I have. We'll certainly have some more later on, but I'm going to turn it over to Christine Thomas, Dean of the College of Natural Resources.
Okay, well, good evening. It's nice to see such a big group here tonight, including some of our emeritus soils professors. Thanks for coming out. I just want to follow up a little bit about the sponsorship of this by the Ralph K. Morris Foundation and the College of Natural Resources. Ralph Morris was an attorney from Minnesota, born on a dairy farm, and he devoted his life to helping cooperatives better the life for farmers. He was interested in the future of farmers and the future of the land and water, and the foundation that is named for him is all about cultivating future leaders who will ensure a better world for farmers, farms, and for those of us who benefit from the wise management of farms. Again, two big supporters of the college, Tom Lyons and Bill Berry, along with William Nelson, got together with Steve and me several times last year to talk about what we would do. And I can't remember what coffee shop we were sitting in when we sort of hatched the idea of the Farm Bill. And that really came out of my involvement in a number of national roles. One is over the last 12 years was advisory to the Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture on wildlife issues, and another is my current role as Senior Vice President for Conservation for Ducks Unlimited. So these are roles where I have interacted on issues around the Farm Bill. And I was just in the Farm Bill, and I won't steal your thunder, and it doesn't matter if they hear a couple of these things twice. The Farm Bill is the biggest piece of private land conservation policy that there is. Every 5 years, the battle lines are drawn, and the battle lines are drawn right now. The deals are cut that will direct how conservation dollars go to private lands. This is not the biggest thing that happens in the Farm Bill. But in fact, it might be one of the smaller things that actually happens in the Farm Bill. But nonetheless, it's the biggest thing that happens in private lands natural resources funding. So this is a very important piece of legislation to you if you're a farmer, if you're a conservationist, if you're a duck hunter, whatever your interest is in how private lands conservation gets funded and what strings are attached to it. This is important to you. So when we cooked up this idea last year, little did we know that the symposium would happen on the very week that the Ag Committee would start the markup on this bill. And so if you Google Farm Bill 2018, which some of you could be doing right now from your tablets or your smartphones, lists and lists and lists of articles that have come out this week in various national publications will tell you how the battle is starting to unfold. I was in DC this week for in my role in Ducks Unlimited, and I just got back yesterday, and I would tell you that every office we visited was talking about the Farm Bill. So we could not be in a more timely situation right now. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Clare Lindahl. And Clare is the CEO of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, the first woman actually to be in that role. And the mission of her organization is, many of our students, how many of you are student members of the Soil and Water Conservation Society? So we've got quite a few of you out here in the audience. The society in its membership has been advancing conservation through advocacy, special projects, and science and education since 1943. Clare previously served as the Executive Director for Conservation Districts of Iowa and as Natural Resources Program Manager with River Action, which is a nonprofit organization. She currently resides in Des Moines. She has been involved, I think originally from the Quad Cities.
Yep.
And she holds a degree in landscape architecture from Iowa State and received her post-baccalaureate certificate in environmental geographic systems from Western Illinois University. And we are really lucky to have you here for this timely topic, and thank you for coming.
Yes, okay. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. I thank the Ralph Morris Foundation, I thank the university, the college, the department for inviting me, and thank you so much everybody for showing up, particularly the students and our student members. Really glad to see some hands up. What I want to do today is introduce you to the society a little bit, tell you a little bit about my professional journey, how I got to be in this position, and then talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, which, as we've heard, is a very timely topic. So a little bit about the Soil and Water Conservation Society. We are the international organization for professionals who practice the art and science of natural resource conservation. And so that's everyone in this room, and we have a nice balance in our membership of students, of practitioners, and of research. And we really are about that actionable and applied science, and about how valuable research is and how valuable it is to use that research so that we can make changes on the landscape for the good of our natural resources. And so a little bit about how we do that. We rose out of the Dust Bowl. We were created in 1944, founded by Hugh Hammond Bennett, who was the same man who founded the Natural Resource Conservation Service and really the entire soil and water conservation movement. And most of the activities around soil and water conservation really rose out of that Dust Bowl, that occurrence that really impacted the farmers and the people of this nation when we intensively farmed the land and we had that long period of drought. We support our members. We work through the professionals that we represent. We work locally. We have local chapters. We have a chapter right here in Wisconsin. We have an esteemed journal, the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation. It's a peer-reviewed journal. We started it in 1946, just 2 years after we founded the society. It has got some great peer-reviewed articles. It also has an A section, which is a section that talks more about sociology, about concepts, about history. It's the section that I can really comprehend, I say. But it's a nice piece to our journal to have both the science and the research, but also the soft sciences, and that information and that ability to communicate things in a non-scientific way to that audience who are always trying to reach with how important this message is. We do other communications as well. We're on social media, and we do newsletters and different email alerts. We have an annual conference, which was here in Madison, Wisconsin, so right here in the state, and it was the largest attendance we had had in 10 years. So Wisconsin really showed out for our annual conference. And then we do special projects and grants as well. And we also do advocacy. And we do this a number of different ways. It's not just lobbying in Washington, D.C. That's often commonly what we think about as advocacy. But we do that through informing and empowering the people that we work with and that we work through. And this is an example of this, giving you the information and the tools that you need so that you can talk to your leaders and your elected officials and have this conversation about how important natural resources are to you. And then we also sign on, we collaborate with other groups to move things forward in Washington, D.C., signing on for support for conservation programming, for research, and for technical assistance. And when we say technical assistance, what we're talking about is the people that we need to have these conversations with landowners to get this work on the ground and to protect our soil and water resources. We have a committee of science and policy members of our organization. We developed an infographic on the president's budget proposal, which showed really drastic cuts to conservation when that came out. And more we're trying to simplify, streamline, and just do our communications in different ways, through infographics, through videos, so that we can appeal to that bigger audience about how important this is. We have representation in DC, and we work to support our chapters in advocacy. I was just in Michigan and had been working with them on some things that were going on around groundwater removal. And so was helping that chapter get that information out to their members so that their members could have conversations with their state legislators about the science behind that and how to use that science and research to make good decisions. So in my opinion, the most important thing I can do is not at the headquarters, but it's out here in the states and supporting the people of the state to advance their local natural resource priorities. And then I will be in Washington, D.C. next week, so I'm coming in hot after the Farm Bill, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit about my professional journey. I did not grow up on a farm. My uncle did have a farm in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. I have a lot of ties to this great state. My mom grew up in Plymouth, Wisconsin. She met my dad. Oh, this is being video recorded, so let's not show mom and dad this, but she met my dad at the Elkhart Lake races. She said that he asked her to dance. She went in the bathroom to freshen up, and then when she came out, he was dancing with her friend. But he drove up from Rock Island, Illinois every weekend and was on her doorstep when she got out of her nursing work every weekend, every Friday he was sitting there, and so the rest is history. But I got a lot of close ties to the state. Grandma was in Fond du Lac, and so have been here hundreds of times in my life, and just Wisconsin is a special place in my heart, so glad to be here. When I started school, I actually started to go into social work. My mom was a nurse. I started at the local community college, and she did mental health nursing, very much social work, like visiting community work. And that was what I thought I really wanted to do. I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference in the world. So started community college in social work, and then I had to take an environmental studies class as a requirement, and they played a video about a hometown hero in the Quad City area called Chad Pagracki. How many people here have heard of Chad Pagracki? Okay, this guy is worth Googling. So Chad Pagracki started when he was 17. He lived right along the Mississippi River where I did, and he saw trash in the river at 17, and he got in a boat and he just started pulling it out. And now, 20 years later, decades later, he facilitates thousands of volunteers to clean up miles and miles of the Mississippi River. He's done the entire stretch of the Mississippi River, so much so that he is working on other rivers. And he was CNN Hero of the Year. He now has barges, and he has sponsors like Budweiser coming out and helping him do this work. And so when I saw this story, and I thought about the river, which I grew up, and my parents still live, where we can see the river from our front porch, I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to do something with the land and the water, and I want to have an impact on the land and the water. And so these are the pictures of the railroad corridor. That was my nature growing up. We lived on the other side of the tracks from the river. This is my dad and my mom and Chad Pagracki, and every year Chad Pagracki hosts something he calls Stream Cleanup, where individual groups of volunteers pick a stretch to clean up. And my mom, dad, and I have participated in that for the last 12 years. And so I go home and we clean up that stretch of the river, and I've gotten my parents engaged in that as well. So that was the start of it for me. And I saw the landscape architecture program at Iowa State University, and I thought, this is really cool. So I got my bachelor's degree in landscape architecture, and I got a post-bachelor's certificate in environmental GIS from Western Illinois. And landscape architecture was really a neat major because it balanced the needs that people have on the land with the environmental services that the land provides. And so it was always a game. We were always working in a different community and trying to look at a piece of land and make sure that it could meet the needs of everyone. And it really set me up well for what I am doing now and what I would do in my future. And at the end, I was required to have an internship. And so I went back home to the Quad Cities and I did 2 internships. I did one at a landscape company, and I did one at a nonprofit organization. And after the 6 months, they both offered me a job. And I was looking at the job offers, and I was looking at my college student loans, and I was looking at the $20,000 difference in the job offers, and I was thinking, I've really got to, this is my time to adult, I've got to grow up, and I took the landscape company job for 2 weeks. And then I went back in, I gave them the $200 they had paid for my business cards, and I went crawling back to River Action, and I said, is that job still available to me, for me? And she said, yes, it is. So that started my career. I became the Natural Resource Program Manager for River Action. We were dedicated to the environmental, recreational, and economic aspects of the river. So balancing all those things along the Mississippi River, really working for the river that raised me. I did watershed planning. I worked with communities to put in best management practices. And it was a nonprofit. I stapled newsletters. I ran things around. I unloaded rain barrels. I did it all. And I started at probably $28,000 a year. It was a nonprofit entry-level job. She had created it to keep me on. And that was what she had in the funding. But I did it, and after 3 years of that, I went with that GIS certificate, and I worked for a soil and water conservation district. And that got me into the agricultural world. And so now I was not just working in the communities, but now I was working on a watershed that was urban. It was half urban and half agriculture. And it had a bacteria impairment. It had really high levels of bacteria in the creek. So working to facilitate those 2 groups, get grants, and get projects in motion to address that issue. And then I got the Conservation Districts of Iowa Executive Director job. So I went from working for one soil and water conservation district to essentially being the association of all 100 in the state. And so did that for 5 years, and then went in and interviewed for the Soil and Water Conservation Society CEO, and we got that 6 months ago. And I'm the first female and probably the youngest person by about 20 years to get that job. So, and I'm so grateful for that applause, but my message here to you students is, you know, I wasn't a real academic student. I'm not going to say my GPA because I don't want anyone to strive for it. It was not something that I was super proud of, but they were really hungry for a young person, and our field are really hungry for young people. So you will have lots of opportunities when you get out of school. And as one of the things I didn't mention that the society does, but something that we're going to be doing a lot more, is that student leadership development. So you keep my contact information, and when you get out of school, if there's anything that I can do to help any of you, you give me a call, and I will. Because I had a lot of folks help me along the way, and that's what it's about. So now I'm going to get into my Farm Bill presentation, and this is a little less polished because I was so proud of myself for having my presentation done a week early. And then they decided to drop the House draft of the Farm Bill. So I was one of those people Googling different articles on the way up and looking through a 641-page document so that I could talk about some of the specifics today. But I'm going to talk a little bit generally about the Farm Bill. I'm going to talk a little bit about its history, and then I'm going to really focus on the conservation conservation piece of the Farm Bill. And like we heard earlier, that's really not the big chunk of the Farm Bill, and that's a dynamic that we'll discuss too. And then I'll just talk about being an advocate for our natural resources and what we can do, and I'm really excited to hear about the panel. The panel is a great diverse array of perspectives, so I'll be really interested to hear what their input on it, and I'll be taking notes for my next Farm Bill presentation, so you guys will be on. So what is the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is an omnibus, just a big multi-year piece of authorizing legislation that governs an array of agriculture and food programs. And it provides a predictable opportunity for policymakers to comprehensively and periodically address ag and rural issues. That's the advantage of it being renewed every 5 years. That's why it's so long, so it can provide that predictability to the landowners, to the farmers, as well as to the legislators. And the current Farm Bill runs through September of 2018. And the history of the Farm Bill, like I said, a lot of the soil and water conservation things really rose out of the Dust Bowl, and that's where the history of the Farm Bill was too. They've been writing them since 1933. It was part of FDR's New Deal to help the country recover from that Great Depression. And there were two reasons that they started to implement a farm bill. And one was to address rock bottom prices for farmers from overproduction, which was causing extreme economic distress. And then the other one was extensive hunger and poverty. So those were the two things that they really sought to address, but also early farm bills addressed soil loss, soil erosion, lack of credit for small farmers, basic rural infrastructure needs, trade policies. And it's so interesting to look back. We were talking about it on the way up. You look back in the Leopold, and so many of these conversations we're still having today. Some of these things really stay relevant, and some of these things we still have work to do on. So who writes the Farm Bill? Well, the House Committee of Ag writes the Farm Bill, as does the Senate Committee of Ag, Nutrition, and Forestry. And I'll show you a little bit about the mechanics of that, so you just kind of generally have that in your head. The Appropriations Committee, full Congress, the President, and then very much so advocacy groups, and industry lobbyists have a big impact on the Farm Bill. And so how big are Farm Bills? This new one is rocking out 641 pages of information that I was scanning through. But gosh, am I glad I'm not here in 2008, or I would have been reading an 1,100-page Farm Bill. So quite a few ranges, but when we talk about omnibus, this is a big bill, and it encompasses a lot. And these are some of the things that it does encompass: commodity support programs, conservation, which is where I'm going to focus my conversation on today, trade, nutrition, credit, rural development, research and extension, forestry, energy, horticulture, crop insurance, and then I think every bill probably has a miscellaneous category, right? So, but you can see that there's a lot of different titles in the Farm Bill. It covers much more than just conservation or just crop insurance. And if you look at it, really the majority of the Farm Bill is nutrition. That's the big chunk of the Farm Bill, is the nutrition program. And that provides assistance for people in need to get help getting food, essentially. And $489 billion is what we were looking at. And if you look at that little conservation slice of the pie, we're coming in at a whopping 6%. So conservation is not a big chunk of the Farm Bill, but it's a very important part of the Farm Bill, in my opinion, and I know to everybody in here. So when we look at that conservation piece, and we talked a lot about it, it's that private lands conservation piece. And in the Midwest, that's particularly important. We are headquartered in Iowa. We are 47th in the nation in public land. And when you look at the impact that Iowa has on just the monarch butterfly and how important we are to the passage of that butterfly, we have to work on private land. We don't have the ability to put in conservation prairie and things like that on public land. We have to work on private land. So how does this money get doled out, and what do we mean when we say conservation? Well, it's broken up into three different areas and an other area, a lot of other and miscellaneous today. But mainly it's financial assistance, easements, partnerships, which is a fairly new program through that conservation piece of the Farm Bill, and there's some other things that are covered in there too. So when we talk about financial assistance, the two big programs there are the Environmental Quality Incentives Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program. So EQIP, or that first one, what that is it's sharing the cost of a conservation practice with a farmer. So if a farmer wants to put in something, that's essentially sharing that cost at a 50-50 rate or something to that extent. And when we talk about the Conservation Stewardship Program, that's really the next step up. The Conservation Stewardship Program provides incentives for farmers to take on more conservation and to be the best conservation stewards that they can be. And then easements. Easements is essentially setting aside land. So Ag Conservation Easement Program, Conservation Reserve Program, Forestry Program. That's essentially taking a piece of land that's in a natural state, or maybe it's sensitive and it's not working for the farmer, and helping that farmer set that land aside and getting an ongoing payment to set that land aside. And then a fairly new program is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And we talk about partnerships a lot when we talk about conservation, because we recognize that so much more can be done when it's the government, the private sector, and the farmer engaged. And other nonprofit organizations have so much more to bring to the table. Ducks Unlimited, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, Isaac Walton Leagues, all of those other groups. When we work together, we can move conservation forward so much farther. And so that Regional Conservation Partnership Program gives us the opportunity to form partnerships and to apply competitively for projects that are cutting edge and that are going to address soil and water issues. And then there are other things the Farm Bill does too. It provides money for technical service providers, which is the private sector helping implement conservation practices when there's not enough government employees to do so. Conservation innovation grants, which is another cutting edge competitive partnership grant. And another one that I really like is the Voluntary Public Access and Habitat Incentive Program. So that gives somebody maybe with some area enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program, so maybe they have a little prairie and they have it set aside, they can open that up to the community for hunting access. And so you can get those dual purposes out of some of those programs. And when we look at the breakdown of these programs, just generally, the majority of it is in that conservation stewardship program. It's that program that, takes it up a notch, that requires or encourages a certain amount of conservation to enroll. A significant portion is in the Conservation Reserve Program, that set-aside program that pays them to not farm land, and then also the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, which is just that cost sharing on those conservation practices. And all of this is essentially doled out through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. How many people have seen a Natural Resource Conservation Service office in their county? Okay. That is a great place to look for internships and volunteer opportunities as well, so you can start to really become familiar with the private lands. It's another opportunity in addition to public land conservation work. So when I'm talking about these conservation practices, what am I talking about? We think about conservation and we often think about a park or a land that's solely used for recreation or for habitat. But when we look at working lands or lands that are in agriculture, our conservation practices can look a little bit different. So cover crops and no-till, these are practices that qualify for those programs that we pay farmers to help them put in. And what these do is that they essentially cover the soil when the crop comes off of it. And that way the soil doesn't move, it doesn't erode, and we don't lose other things when it rains, and we don't contribute to water quality being poor. Wetlands and bioreactors, these are new practices. A lot of our land in the Midwest particularly is tiled. And so water goes down and it goes out through that tile. And so these practices can capture that water at the end of the tile and clean it up before it enters a receiving stream. We also do a lot of practices with pasture management, with different agricultural facilities that relate to livestock. A lot of that cost share in the past has been used to help folks deal with livestock and waste of livestock so that that doesn't impact receiving streams and lakes and rivers. And then we have places where we can put vegetation along the stream so we're not farming up next to it. How many people have seen a terrace in the landscape? Yeah, so what that does is just simply holds the soil back from moving. And then a waterway also goes in a field where water naturally moves so that soil doesn't wash away. So these are really important practices, but it's not just to conservation that these practices are important. Can you see how these practices would be positive for a farmer and for their land, to keep their soil and their water and the nutrients that they put down in place? Right? So they're important for conservation in the environment, but they're also important for the production and the economy of the farmer. And this is what is a result when we don't put conservation on the land. This is what can happen. And I see this all too much, where we have soil washed away, we have banks eroding, and we have things coming off of feedlots. And so that's what these programs are solutions to. They're solutions to when we farm the land, we have an impact on the land. And so this is the impact, and this is what those conservation practices fix. And I think about all the problems in the world, a lot, more than I should. I'm kind of a worrywart. But we don't have answers to all of those problems. But when I think about conservation and soil erosion and water quality, it really excites me that we have the science and the solutions to those issues. And so it's about scaling up the application on the land. And it's unique because it's so different to every piece of land. But we have this toolbox of solutions. And that is really, really exciting to me. And that's what excites me about this work. And so I don't have to tell you the value of conservation, but I was having this moment the other night. I don't know, I was, in one of those deep, dark despairs of conservation, but sometimes I'm really hopeful, and sometimes you have those moments where you really want to scale things up, you really want to help, and you get stuck on how to do it. And I was watching a commercial, and I was thinking, there's Crest White strips on TV, and I'm thinking more people might know what Crest White strips are than soil conservation. Oh man, we got to get a video to go viral, or I got to do a drunk history on soil conservation. We got to get something going, like we have got to get this out here. But I'm always reminded about why we do this, and I don't think we think about this enough as the people practicing it, and I don't think that we share this enough with our family and our friends and those folks that don't know how important soil and water is. But growing food is incredibly important to our nation. It's incredibly important to our security, our tourism industry, the people that come to your state. The reasons we want to live in this state and be in this state, our quality of life as residents in America really depends on soil and water conservation. Just for the sake of the plants and the fish and the wildlife, and people think, well, why do I care about that clam that might be on the endangered list or that flower? You just never know. I mean, so many of our medicinal cures and things like that come from our natural environment, and we never know how important something is to us, and if it's gone, we surely won't know that it's important to us. And then our natural heritage, just that connection to our natural heritage, so that our kids and our grandkids and our future generations can explore and have those same experiences with our natural resources that we did. So, I want to talk a little bit about what happened in the 2014 Farm Bill. Okay, so now we've kind of got an idea of what all is made up of the Farm Bill. We've pulled that conservation title out. You can kind of see how that gets applied to the land in these different conservation programs. So what happened in our last Farm Bill to conservation? Well, our conservation title experienced some major cuts and it consolidated or eliminated nearly a dozen programs. And we had repeated cuts throughout the year during essentially annual appropriations that get made to conservation. Our conservation stewardship program was cut by over 20%. That's that program that really brings folks up to the next level in conservation. And then we consolidated all of those easement programs into one. So we used to have these multiple different easement programs related to different sensitive areas. We consolidated those all into one, and in that consolidation, our funding went from $700 million to $250 million per year. So we had quite a drop in that. And then we cut the conservation reserve program acreage cap from 32 to 24 million acres. So what that means was that land that we were helping farmers set aside, we were doing a lot less of that. And so now what's happening at the 2018 draft House Farm Bill? Let me Google it. It could have changed since I put this together an hour ago, but it was kind of a mixed bag. There were some good things for conservation, but overall there were some pretty large cuts. So we did increase that CRP acreage from 24 million acres to 29 million acres. So we got more, the ability to set more land aside that maybe isn't being productive for the farmer, but could go into something that would be good for wildlife and pollinators. But we reduced the payments that we pay to farmers for that. And so that's going to make it potentially a little bit more challenging to have someone enroll in that because that payment is now reduced. They did something kind of exciting for source water. So source water is essentially drinking water, and they made a provision that essentially made that a priority. So that was something interesting and new, and what I think that has the potential to do is to really bring in the communities. And so what I've seen, you know, they've talked so much about this rural-urban divide, but when I was doing watershed work, that really wasn't the case. And I think that some of the more successful projects that we had were when we brought the rural and urban folks together. And when we did get those folks together, they really did want to help one another. Making drinking water a priority with the Farm Bill kind of brings communities into clean water and healthy soil. The draft House bill provided $250 million a year for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. So that was that sort of new program that allowed all of these different partners, the Ducks Unlimited of the world, all these different groups to come together and to do competitive conservation program applications and work together on innovative new ideas. So that used to just borrow money from other sectors in the past, and it got its own line item, which is really cool. But it did not add any additional technical assistance. And this is something that groups have been really hungry for. So it's hard to get people on often in the government. If you want to shrink government, or if you don't want to invest in government, you're more likely to contract with a nonprofit organization or work through other organizations to put staff on. And we just know about conservation work that the people who do this work, your future jobs, they're so important, and this work can't get done without those future leaders. We need to be having people on the land, having these conversations with the farmers and with the communities, and bringing these folks together and sharing all this information and knowledge. And so that was something that that program didn't have, and that a lot of folks had kind of asked for, and it didn't quite get there. There was an increase in $500 million a year for that agricultural conservation easement program. That was the one that all the easement programs got wrapped up into, and so that was a bump. And then that conservation innovation grant did allow dollars to go directly to farmers, which was sort of new, that was sort of a new thing. And there were some folks excited about that because they thought that might get them to have some farmers try some really new, innovative things if they could pay them directly. But overall, this Farm Bill cut conservation title in the tune of $5 billion over 10 years. So overall, this was a cut. And it essentially did away with the conservation program, or it rolled it under the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So it didn't necessarily do away with it, but in the proposal to roll it under, you know, the argument was really made that it didn't keep the things that made the program unique and that got people to enhance and go to that next conservation level. And then it also got into some issues, this has been a pretty hot topic, associated with the Endangered Species Act and federal insecticide, fungicide, and rodenticide. And I think this is going to be kind of a sticking point moving forward because there were some groups pretty upset that this just didn't belong in this bill. And so that was another thing that really popped out as I was looking over the bill and looking over a lot of the different organizations' reactions to the bill. So what are the dynamics, I guess, around the Farm Bill? What's going to happen moving forward? One, the focus in Washington is on the federal deficit and debt. Fiscal discipline, reducing spending, reducing size of the government. That's the focus in Washington. And so that's going to impact conservation and impact a lot of other programs as well. And the farm and rural economy is down. And so hopefully legislators see that, the Farm Bill, as an opportunity to help our farm and rural economy. That's what when we see that talking point, that's what we hope that's about, that they see that they're hurting and that they need assistance through our Farm Bill program and the opportunity that the Farm Bill can bring to rural America and to our farmers. But the real hang-up is going to be SNAP. It's going to be the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And that's going to hang this Farm Bill up, essentially. And I predict, is my magic prediction ball? Oh, I left it in the car. Well, I'll make my prediction anyway. I predict that we might get an extension on the Farm Bill instead of a new Farm Bill. And I don't know, that would be then after the elections. And so that could maybe lessen the urgency or the priorities of some of these things. It could then lose sort of its political significance if it's done after the elections. People tend to act a little differently before elections and after elections. But it's the nutrition program, it's the changes that have been made to that program that essentially Republicans have made in an attempt to do what they think is best for the program that Democrats just don't agree on. And I don't think that they're going to be able to come to terms. I hope they are, but that will be the big rub. And you see what big chunk of the nutrition program is. And so that's always the argument every year. Why is the nutrition program in the Farm Bill? And there's been a lot of discussion in the past about separating them out, but we can't, there's a belief that we can't pass a Farm Bill without those two things together because, and whether that's true or not, I don't know, but there's a belief that we need that urban and ag connection to get all of the legislators on board. And so that's the reality of where we are right now. So looking ahead, what are some of those key deadlines? 2014 Farm Bill expires on September 30th, 2018, and that's the date by which Congress needs to write and pass that new Farm Bill. And then April 12th, 2018 is when the House released its draft bill, and then they marked it up through the committee and passed it yesterday on straight party line, but they passed it, but it was on party line. And then May 2018, the House they're going to take that House draft bill to the floor, and the Senate version is expected. So if you can kind of see, those two things run parallel. The House comes up with their own bill, the Senate comes up with their own bill, they bring them together in conference, they take them back out, they bring them back together, they do the hokey pokey, and then we have a Farm Bill. Or an extension. So that's the update, that's where we are at. And so what do we do? What does that mean to us as individuals, as students, as you know, just people in the world. Advocacy was not something I really felt comfortable with when I came on to Conservation Districts of Iowa, and they said, you're going to go to the Capitol and you're going to speak with legislators. And I was like, I'm going to do what? You want me to do that? And I can't tell you how important it is to advocate. Lobbyists get paid, but advocacy comes from the grassroots. And so I represented elected officials who did not get paid, and I was advocating. And when you call your legislators, that's what you're doing too. You're advocating for a cause. You're not getting paid, but you're sharing your knowledge, and you all have great knowledge in this room about natural resource, and you're learning more and more every day. So have your voice heard. Call your legislator, email your legislator. It only takes a minute. Do not be nervous to do so. We are really lucky in this country to have the ability to do that. And so I encourage you to take advantage of that because it's a good thing. And use multiple media forms. It's not about, it's not just a call anymore. Twitter, Facebook, all of those things, we need to break soil and water conservation into that world and to make this a conversation and a dialogue, and start a dialogue, share that information so that we can make this something that's talked about just as much as other legislature, as healthcare, as all those other things. Let's make this just as important, because it is just as important. Understand that advocacy is a process. So it's not an event, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's building relationships. And if you start calling your legislators now, especially at student age, you will have a relationship with your legislators, and that will help you in your next position, and that will help you on your resume to say that I have been advocating to my legislators about natural resource conservation, and it may be appropriate in a job that you apply for to have that skill and that ability. And it's something that's done over time, but if you, it's very important. And then here's my shameless pitch. Of course, join the Soil and Water Conservation Society. We have tools that we are going to be putting out for students, for leadership development, for advocacy, and we will help you have those conversations. All of the folks that I worked for at Conservation Districts of Iowa were farmers. And when they got in there, they just thought, you do that, Claire. I don't want to do that. And their legislators would literally push me out of the way to talk to their constituent. So, advocate, but also give folks around you a platform to advocate as you get into your positions. If you're working with a farmer who's doing good conservation work, help them advocate as well. So, connect with us. I'm in a room where everyone knows what all of these icons are, so I don't have to go through them. I'm usually not in that. Everyone's like, what are the hugging people on the left? So, but get connected with the society. Join us. We have a $58 student registration fee, student membership fee, but also just follow us on Facebook. Get connected with us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Check us out and be part of that dialogue. Have your voice heard with us so that as we go advocate next week, I'm advocating to the voice of the natural resource community. Okay, that concludes my presentation.
My name is Justin Isherwood. I happen to live in Portage County, and I am one of those animals. Meaning, I'm a farmer. Actually, I'm an endangered species, and I think farmers need to think of themselves as an endangered species. That way we might relate to the world better, including ourselves, and the predicament we are in, which is every 5 years we go through this thing called a farm bill. And to be frank, it shuffles the deck. But it seems like we are on a treadmill of not making the kind of grand strides that I think not only my sector is capable of, but what this America is capable of. As some of you know, I mean, farmers can get their head in the sand And it's difficult sometimes, especially in red-hued American agriculture, who a few years ago thought the way, the truth, and the life was coming on, and small government was going to deliver some kind of new paradigm to agriculture. And that hasn't happened. In fact, we realize some of the cheap tricks of foreign trade and are not so cheap. My farm sector is facing perhaps the reduction of prices unparalleled in the last 10 years anyway, maybe the last 20 years, and because of our political advocacy that took the wrong turn. Geez, I don't mean to talk politics, but I guess that's what Farm Bill is about. Your turn.
Well, I want to thank the organizers for bringing me here. My name is Tom Sauer. I'm an alumni of UW-SP, and it's really great to see Ron Hensler and Milo Harpstead, my advisor here. You did a good job, Milo. I think I turned out okay.
You did indeed.
I grew up on a farm in southwest Minnesota, and I would actually echo just what you said. My dad would say, you know, farming's hard, but when they change the rules on me every year, it gets even harder. And he would be involved in the farm programs, set aside acres, ever normal grain ring, all these sort of programs. But he always said, quit changing the rules on me, quit shuffling the deck, all of that. He was really echoing that. And you know, conservation is a long-term commitment. If you change the rule every 5 years, it's hard to make that commitment. And I don't know if the people who make the Farm Bill appreciate that. I'm a researcher with USDA, so sorry, let me back up a little bit. I fully support all of the administration programs because I'm part of the administration. But I'm a researcher, and I'm really happy to be involved in events like this because as a researcher, I can get stuck in my office doing my experiments, writing my papers, and I can easily lose track and lose touch of what's happening out there. So I'm going to be listening a lot tonight as well. I hope I can impart some good knowledge, but I'm also listening because that's really important to us to stay connected. If you want to be a good, valuable researcher, that's really, really important. So thanks everyone, and it's great to see a big crowd like this. Good job.
Yeah, really great turnout tonight. See quite a few familiar faces. It's really nice to be here with you all. My name's Mike Carlson, and I'm Executive Director of Gathering Waters, and we're Wisconsin's Alliance for Land Trusts. So we're essentially a trade association for 43 land trusts in Wisconsin. Some of you may be wondering, what the heck's a land trust? So when I say the word land trust or land conservancy, what I really mean is basically an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization. So my trade association, we have 43 nonprofits who are members around Wisconsin that are out there permanently protecting land through conservation easements and through, in some cases, purchasing land from private landowners. Many of our land trust members are involved in working lands protection. So that could be protection of forest lands, or farmlands or grasslands here in the state. So our role as a trade association, as a statewide association, it's actually kind of evolved over time. So we were founded in 1994. At the time, there were about 12 land trusts operating across the state. For the first about 10 years or so of our organization's existence, we really focused on helping to form new land trusts around the state. And we saw a pretty incredible growth. So it went from 12 to now today 43 around the state. Since then, our mission has really evolved, so we focus very much on training and technical assistance to our land trust members, but also to public policy advocacy. And so that's, I think, in large part why I'm here today, why our perspective is represented here at this panel. But we primarily focus on state public policy issues and funding for conservation at the state level, but we're also engaged at the national level as well. And primarily when we're doing work at the national level, it's really as part of larger national coalitions. We could never, just from Wisconsin have influence on something like the Farm Bill, but we plug into national coalitions. So I was actually also out in DC just last week with our national umbrella group called the Land Trust Alliance. So the Land Trust Alliance nationally, they represent 1,000 land trusts across the country. It's just an incredible number of organizations. And one of the top priorities for the Land Trust Alliance is the Farm Bill, and in particular the conservation title of the Farm Bill. And even more narrow than that is one of the programs that was on Claire's slides, the ASEP program, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. And so I'll talk a bit more, I think, later in the discussion here about kind of some of my experiences, some of the Land Trust Alliance's experiences, kind of working through the advocacy process. But the ASEP ALE program is really a top priority for us. So again, great to be with you all here tonight. Look forward to the conversation.
Okay, well, maybe we should open it up to some questions from the audience then, get a little audience participation here. Anybody have a question they'd like to start with? Professor Hensler?
Directed to Justin, I think, because he's has the boots on the ground this way. A lot of the low prices are probably due to oversupply, both within the state, the nation, the world. Is there going to be a role for a quota program? I see that the dairy group, or some people in dairy are starting to think about doing what the Canadians are doing.
So the question was prefaced by an observation that low prices have probably followed oversupply. And the question was, does he see a role for a quota program of some kind?
If there's a God, Yahweh, or Allah, there will be. And that's one of the innovative things that I think that growers, if they could simply understand what's possible to do. And Wisconsin and the United States has one, and I happen to be a potato grower, and we have a group that has brought about a system to self-limit our production. Has it made a lot of difference? No, but it's made an incremental difference that does make a difference, especially when times are really tight. And I think that is very possible to do, especially in our major crops. However, what I would like to see is programs like that tied to some water qualities, reduce nitrates. If we could tie a farm bill to, and this is my dream, to give farmers a $5 corn market for reducing 25% of their nitrate use, we could perhaps create a market that would give them $5 without a federal subsidy, and do something about the dead zone.
Other questions? Sure.
Pete Arnson, I live in Stevens Point here, and for Claire, I'm glad to see some of the things in the Farm Bill. I'm working with a group of folks working on a public health groundwater protection ordinance for Portage County. And it's good that that source water issue is in the Farm Bill. And you also mentioned that urban-rural partnerships are working well, and we have a couple of those going on here in Portage County. And so just pointing out that we're doing that. We're still a minority working towards it, but it's good to know, and it's good that the feds are supporting it. And I saw Ken here, if he could tell his group of the farm sector that, look, there's support for doing this, it'll work. And so I'm not enthused about our upper levels of politics and politicians, but I see hope acting on a local level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was really interesting to see a urban legislator bring sort of that source water idea, and having seen successful partnerships between the urban and ag community, and I find a lot of hope in that community building as well. So that's definitely a bright spot.
I think we need to remind everybody, though, it's not over till it's over. And I know what you've seen is a proposal, and it's possible
Yes.
it may not be over at all. And so that piece isn't in the 2014 Farm Bill.
No, and yeah, that's a good
So
point
if
to
nothing
call.
happens, it won't happen.
Yeah, and so it's a good point to shoot your legislators an email that if you think that's a highlight and something that's got to stay in there, to tell them, I've got a local group and it's working, and that support would help my local group do more conservation.
Okay, other questions?
What about the school nutrition programs? I mean, I think that's one of the best uses of this surplus that we have, if we can get good meals to kids in the school. What do you know about that?
I don't know much about the SNAP reform. I think that there's probably opportunities to scale that up, but I think it's looking more at a reduction of those nutritional programs. And I don't know if it's a reduction of kids, but they're looking at more reducing through work requirements, requiring people of a certain age to work or to participate in a work education program in order to get SNAP or nutrition benefits. That's what the proposal is in the current Farm Bill, and that's what's got Democrats held up on it, essentially. And that's pretty much the extent I know about that piece.
Anyone else want to say anything about that? Okay, go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Dean. So I was at a program last week, or a couple weeks ago, in Madison, sponsored by the Wisconsin Academy of Sciences, Arts, and Letters, on science in today's world. And several of the speakers, with some authority, said probably the biggest environmental challenge we have in this country today and going forward is the loss of soil. Even with all the good Farm Bill programs we've had since the conservation title in 1984, we're at about a 50% loss of native soil, according to some of these speakers. I'm wondering how you all think we're going to reverse that before it's way too late.
Well, if we knew how, it wouldn't be too late. I think some of the issues that the farm sector finds startling is the complexity of the soil. And we're NPK kinds of mentalities, and we don't really understand some of the roles, and I'm not saying the science has been out there for a generation. It hasn't. We are just learning how that there are some ways to naturally manage nematodes. Most people think that's a body part. It's not. And some of my farm sector doesn't. And some of these, the organisms that can help plants convert nitrates in the soil, and without those there, you end up needing more nitrates. There's a chance we could do some seriously good things with nitrate management with a better understanding of the soil. And I was an English major, which is not how you become a farmer, but there I am. I can't. I have to go to friends and say, okay, what's going on in my ground? I think that's true of most farmers. We really don't know, and I think the science is just now coming into a new vista of what's happening beneath us and how to preserve it.
I actually have a little perspective on this, if that's okay. What we have known since 1933 is if it blows away, it's no good. Okay, so that part has been in place for a long time, and I'm wondering. This just occurred to me tonight. If part of the problem isn't that the Farm Bill comes up every 5 years, okay. So as we try to influence. Dr. Thompson and I share a course that I used to teach and now he teaches that talks about tools of the resource manager for influencing people's behavior on private land. And of course, one of the tools of the resource manager is incentives. And that's what we're really talking about in the Farm Bill, sort of incentives that require certain behaviors to happen in order for you to get the incentive. And in order to get farmers to buy into the incentive and commit to the behavior, it can't be too restrictive or they won't do it. Okay, so you're trying to balance the incentive with the carrot with the stick. Because if the stick is too big or used too much, then no one will take the incentive because it's not worth it to them, okay? To give up their freedoms or to restrict their future use of their land. So as a policymaker, you're trying to find that sweet spot, you know, where the person will take the carrot and then do the behavior that you'd like to see happen. And I think that I would love to see a study that looked at how many times we have done the same conservation practice on the same piece of land. That it comes in, and then the price of corn goes to, you know, $8 a bushel or $12 a bushel, and it goes out. And then the price drops to potatoes to 50 cents a hundredweight, and it comes back in again. And so I think it'd be really interesting. T by 2000, remember that? We were going to have, you know, all the zero soil loss by the year 2000. Well, that was 18 years ago. I don't think we're there yet. And I think some of it is that we do the same things over and over again, and then we undo them, and then we do them again. That's just my little non-panelist perspective on the problem.
Maybe just to offer some broader points. I'm not by any means an expert on soil health, but just related to some broader points, just reacting to what the Dean just mentioned. I think one thing to really emphasize is not to underestimate how the Farm Bill is like the ultimate example of sausage making in the U.S. Congress. I just think about the number of other large pieces of legislation that actually pass on their own. In this day and age, most things get packaged up into those big omnibus bills that you hear about in the news every, you know, year, couple of years. To me, we shouldn't underestimate how remarkable the Farm Bill is in terms of the number of interests that are brought to the table: urban interests, rural interests, conservation interests. I think that's a point worth making in terms of how getting anything across the finish line requires, I think, realizing that there's lots of different interests that are going to be at play at a bill of this size. I would also emphasize, I think one of the probably the best things that came out of the 2014 Farm Bill was the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which really is allowing for more innovation on the ground, and it's allowing partners to come together in new ways, to find different ways, I think, to apply incentives, to bring public and private sector together. So that, to me, seems like really pushing for more opportunities for innovation and flexibility seems like a huge opportunity moving forward, and for all of us to be thinking about that within the Farm Bill. The third piece I'll just mention too, again, this is a much broader kind of global point, is that I think we should all recognize that public sources of funding for all of these things are constantly under pressure. And even in the 2014 Farm Bill, you saw cuts to that program with a split Congress and a different administration. You saw cuts even within that. Certainly we see that across the country at the state level. So I think also it's important for us, as much as it's critical for the Farm Bill, that the resources that come to the table from the Farm Bill, it's also, I think, absolutely critical for us to be thinking about where are those new sources of capital we can bring to these issues, and whether it's through ecosystem services, whatever, bringing private sector and investment capital to the table. That, to me, is where the real creativity and the kind of next generation is going to come from. The public funding is absolutely essential piece of the puzzle, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be what gets us sort of where we want to go. So that's just a broader perspective, I think.
I think it's a very, very good question. Is it working? If we've been passing farm bills since 1933 to improve soil and water conservation, and we're still rehashing the same issues. Is it working? Do we need a new model? We have to remember, before 33, the federal government never worked on private land. When they planted the shelter belts for the Dust Bowl, when the Forest Service planted those, the biggest opposition in Congress was using federal funds on private land. They fought it tooth and nail. So it was a revolutionary concept to use federal funds on private land. I think it's going to take an equal revolution to change from what we have in the Farm Bill. We have little tweaks here and there, programs shrink, programs grow, but are we making real progress? That's the question. And stop me, Claire, we've had this conversation in the car on the way up.
But it was a 6-hour car ride, so.
Yeah, I'm just the guy who brought Claire here. The concept of T just really, really bothers a lot of researchers. It says a tolerable soil loss, and if you look at the background of that, it's intolerable. We need to totally flip our mentality, and I hope the focus on soil health helps with this. We're going to feed 7, 8, 9 billion people, losing 5 tons per acre per year of our topsoil? I don't think so. I don't think we'll be able to afford the inputs to grow crops on subsoil. It's not going to happen. We need to think about building soils, not slowing down their degradation. It's a different philosophy. And until we sort of ingrain that in our programs, I think we're just going to, unfortunately, try these sort of Band-Aid solutions here and there. And if we're really serious about this, and I am, I think it's going to take a total change in philosophy.
That's, just to wrap it up, we all touched on something that essentially is the soft sciences. It's the sociology. And it's the things that it's so good to hear that you're doing that in your natural resource courses, because I think the folks that are out there working and selling conservation now, they had these really scientific rigor of courses, but they weren't taught sales skills. We have a voluntary system. No one has to participate in these programs, and probably only 10% of farmers across the nation do. That's probably what our max, at least I think in our state, it was 10% of an impact we were having through these. So what can we look at about theories of adoption and things that where adoption is occurring or where people are doing it on their own or with different partnerships? How can we scale those things up? Because this isn't going to get us there alone. And how can we strengthen that? How can we really look at the sociology of that?
William?
Do you mind if I stand?
No, I don't.
I just want to, for you students, always sit in the front row.
We're not leaving here without one student question. I am standing right. All right, we got 2. There we go. The lady stepped up. I knew it would be you.
I want to just explain. I was introduced as chair of the board. I am, and I'm honored to do that. And I would also mention Tom Lyon and I were 2 of the founders of the Ralph Morris Foundation. Also introduced Joel Nilsson and Rod Nilsson's sister Wilda. A few years ago, when Rod Nilsson passed away, I think many of you knew him. He was your Secretary of Ag. Many of us knew him from his co-op work before, but we added the dimension of conservation to the Ralph Morris Foundation. My own background, I came out of the University of Minnesota. I retired a couple of years ago as head of the CHS Foundation. But one of the things that I think has happened in the last few years, and I'll pose the question to you, but there may be people in the audience, it's around the word sustainability. And I'll just wear my former CHS hat. We're a grain company, an oil company, but we were being bombarded by the General Mills, the whole chain out there, the Walmarts, everybody saying, you have got to get your farmers to change, and or we're not going to buy your products anymore. And if you're a publicly traded company or even a family or a privately held like Cargill, that was an easier message to them. And I worked with my counterparts in those companies because I was representing us on field to market. And the concept behind field to market was on the main commodities, they were going to have farmers measure things. And the cotton growers actually got to the point where they could demonstrate by monitoring what they were doing and implementing sustainable practices, they could increase income. That was only one part of it. Since then, there have been a whole lot of things back in the Twin Cities. Cargill has come out with the water quality. General Mills, Land O'Lakes has a SUSTAIN program. And I'm also on the Farm Foundation board, and I'd gotten CHS to the point where we were starting to invest in conservation, and I had to word it carefully. I called it soil, water, and environment. And one of our farmer board members, after going over this again and again, called me up from his farm in Nebraska, and he said, for the first time, I'm starting to understand this. He said, I went out and looked at my soil, which was something I stood on, and I plowed and did all this, and I realized all those microbes are in there. So another thing that's happened along with sustainability, the whole market has changed, but also the Soil Health Institute was created with a $20 million gift from the Noble Foundation, and some of the money we put in there went as well. But what does the world look like now, and are you seeing any of that showing up? You know, it's going to take a while yet, but I still maintain, and I had people at CHS who disagreed with me, but we're going to be at a point where farmers are not going to be able to do this, okay? It's going to change. So either wait until somebody does it to you, or you figure out how to get out in front. And the other thing, the new technologies about nitrogen fixing in grasses, I think really has some promise and hope. So, long question, I apologize, but sustainability going to help us go at things differently.
I think that's another market tool that people are talking about. We talk about a market driven, and so there are some that believe that the Walmarts can of the world essentially can spark a movement and help create impetus around that. And I know there's been a lot of tools developed around it, but I've seen the tools, and I know they're in the process, but like you said, we're starting it, but we're not there yet.
One of the problems, I think, of especially the mainstream of American agriculture, and it's not local food, organics, craft foods have figured this out, but the relationship with the consumer, with the market, with the identity, with that, you know, okay, we're guys, it pays to have a soft side. Agriculture hasn't figured out that there is a benefit to a soft side. I look at most of my farm brethren, who I dearly love, but there's a hard edge when it comes to saying, I'm just going to do my business, and how I do it, what matters is production, and it's hundredweight per acre, it's bushels per acre, and that's it. And it's not true. When that light will go off in the bulk of us, that how we look will not only change how we operate, but how the ethics of our operation, and with those ethics, we gain a market. I think you can ask the consumer to pay for the difference between a $5 price of corn and a $7 price of corn is 2.5 cents per tortilla. If people care about how you did it, if craft beer with a pistachio flavor can sell at Central Waters, we can sell
Is that downtown?
corn. Later. we can sell a American farm product that has the same kind of craft approach.
I think the sustainability driven by the consumer could be huge.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying it's going to solve all our problems, but I think the most important part of it, I think, is it raises awareness. I live in a town of 50,000 people. There's 25,000 or 30,000 students, PhDs and master's degrees and bachelor's degrees, and you go to a school function, they're sprinkled liberally through the audience. They ask what I do, and this is the middle of Iowa. I say I'm a soil scientist, I do research, and you can tell right away they don't understand anything about agriculture. You know the joke about the milk comes from the grocery store? I'm in Iowa. These are educated people. They're disconnected. They're totally disconnected. We can do anything to get them more connected. I think it'll come along. It's not going to be, overnight, but I think it's an awareness that it's just one of those tools in the toolbox that can help get us there.
I would just mention too, one organization, there's lots of organizations working on these issues, but one that hasn't been mentioned yet tonight, but I think deserves a mention, especially, students are thinking about career paths, is the Nature Conservancy. And, a lot of folks, I think about the Nature Conservancy and the role that they've played for decades in, they've done a lot to protect land at a landscape scale in Wisconsin and many other states, but they've really, really invested a lot in this area. And I think, there's, in terms of sustainability, landscape resilience, that's one organization of many to just be aware of and keep an eye out for. But there's a lot of exciting things happening in this area.
In my Ducks Unlimited role, we have recently hired a person whose expertise is ecological goods and services. Okay, so our title is Ducks Unlimited, but we're really about water. That's what we're really about. And we've never marketed that. And I think that you're going to see that marketing of that concept rolling out of our organization on a much higher level. So as we're starting to talk about this, I've been Googling large corporations to see what are their sustainability policies. They all have them. Okay, so if you're interested in where some of the Coca-Cola, Google them and see what is their sustainability policy. It's to be water neutral worldwide. In other words, every bottle of water or every bottle of Coca-Cola will have been replaced by their conservation practices on the land. And there are some places in the world where they are actually accomplishing that, where they, in the community, they put enough conservation practice on the land to capture enough water to make up for the water going in bottles of water or bottles of Coca-Cola. And so that, I mean, to me, that maybe some sectors haven't caught up to that general idea yet, but I also wonder, and of course sustainability, it can be economical or we wouldn't have Whole Foods as an example, but is it a phase? Will sustainability be a phase with the consumer and not sustainable for the long run? I wonder that. Other questions? We had a student.
Yeah, so I was wondering if the farm bill would be an appropriate platform for getting young, well not just young, but like all age demographics of startup farmers, and if there would be anything, maybe it's too late for this farm bill, but if this would be the platform for advocacy in the future to have platforms such as like student loan forgiveness for new farmers.
Oh, that's a good one. Wow. They have this. There is some starter, new beginning farmer programs through the Farm Bill, and I just sort of glanced at those things, and it didn't look like they got hit too bad. It looked like there were some groups that were pretty happy with what the outcomes of those. But I don't know. Student loan forgiveness, I've never heard of that idea, and that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, it's a neat twist, but it's late.
Yeah, but who knows? Start now. Remember, I said it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I would start emailing that today. That's a great idea.
We have a question here.
I'm wondering what work your conservations groups do on transferability of land, then, because that's one of the biggest barriers and issues in terms of if you want early adapters, which are often younger people that are taking on ownership of land, and that's one of the biggest limitations if you want a group of farmers that want to take on these conservation practices.
I know there are certainly examples in parts of the United States where conservation easements have been used to help sort of bring prices down and for properties, and then since the organizations that are doing this work are mission driven, they'll actually be looking for new and beginning farmers to help them be able to afford that land, to purchase it, and then encumbered by a conservation easement. I've seen that on sort of work in both directions. I know I actually serve on the commission for the town of Dunn, just south of Madison, that has a purchase of development rights program. And I know one thing that we're struggling with a bit is that a number of the farms that were permanently protected with conservation easements, the size of the farms, they can't be subdivided any further because of the easement. The size of the farm is like well in excess of what a CSA vegetable farmer would need, right? And so there are, I think, some challenges to how conservation easements could be deployed to assist with new and beginning farmers. But again, like the Vermont Land Trust is one example. They've got a really robust program helping with that land transfer. So that's, again, it's not a panacea, but it's one example of something that could work.
One of the things about the Farm Bill, it's often been blamed as being one of the impediments to people beginning farmers, simply because it's sustaining land prices beyond what's realistic. And I have several friends who would like to farm in Iowa, but $15,000 an acre for 200 acres that's worse than a student loan.
So this will never be the end of a conversation tonight. It'll be the beginning. But being aware of our time and everyone here, I wanted to ask one last question of each of you. And that's, the Farm Bill is a huge document, which you laid out for us, Claire. How would you suggest students and the public interested in natural resources become conversant in this policy?
Yeah. So a lot of groups really break it down for you. So it sounds cliche, but Googling Farm Bill is going to bring up a lot of topics. And that's a lot of what I do. I'd skim through it, PDF search conservation, but a lot of it is just looking at what every single organization I know about is weighing in on. How are the environmental organizations, how are the farm organizations weighing in on it, looking at not just the opinions that sort of show up on my Facebook feed that I know are common to my own, but looking at, I actively seek out groups that I know I won't agree with, and I see how they're looking at it too, so that I can have as diverse of a look on it as I can. And that's the thing, there's a lot of media sources out there, and a lot of them are very opinion-based, but if you look at a lot of things, you'll be able to get the gist quickly, I think, and be able to form opinions. But I always challenge you to look at other opinions too, so you can kind of grow your own.
A couple of ideas. One is, and I just did this earlier today just to remind myself, just actually looking at the bill, like looking at the legislation. It's amazing how you can just look at the table of contents and just scan it. Claire had the table of contents up on a slide, but you get a pretty quick sense of what the priorities are for this country and for this piece of legislation just by looking at the table of contents. The other thing I would just mention is you wouldn't necessarily know it by hearing folks talking on television every day in Washington, but there are some of the most brilliant researchers in America that work for the United States Congress. The Congressional Research Service puts out a publication that is called "What is the Farm Bill?" And I've found that actually to be a pretty accessible document. And again, just familiarizing yourself with what are some of the elements of the bill and otherwise. I couldn't resist just wanting to answer or sort of touch on one other question from earlier about the question about the students getting potentially more involved. I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things. One is how important bipartisanship is in any advocacy work, and none of the work that any of our organizations are talking about would get done without a real focus on bipartisanship. But the other point I just want to make is that you actually can make a difference in this. It feels absolutely gigantic and overwhelming, but individuals really can make a difference. And I'll just mention one anecdote that back in January of 2017, I was in a meeting in a windowless room at a hotel at Chicago O'Hare Airport with a group of land trust leaders from around the country, with leadership from the Land Trust Alliance, our national umbrella group, and from American Farmland Trust, which is a fantastic national organization. And we were talking about what are the priorities going to be for the land trust community in this farm bill. And we got extremely focused on that one sub-program, the ACEP program, extremely focused on the funding and a number of policy changes. And lo and behold, this recent House bill that just came out had almost to a letter every single one of those changes and the increase in funding in there. A lot of other organizations, Ducks Unlimited had that as a top priority. A lot of other organizations were involved in that, but I think it's important. We had folks from California and Colorado and Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all in this room talking about where do we have relationships with members of Congress, with members of the committees, like how can we make a difference in this? And so I just share that as an anecdote that it is possible to influence something like that's even at this scale.
I'd echo that. I had what we call congressional science briefing training. So my agency doesn't allow me to interact with Congress, but they teach me how to. So it's a really good program. And you stole my thunder, because I was going to also recommend the Congressional Research Service. They're very independent. They're nonpartisan. They're very, very well respected, and they do really good work. The other thing I would also echo is they told us the most important thing you can do is to write a letter to your member. Why is that? It's not easy. And it's a holdover from the old days. Every letter has to be answered. If it's an interesting letter, it may not be the intern that answers it. They may actually give it to a staffer who may actually read it. And so they said, and we had former members of Congress training us, and they said, absolutely, letter is the most powerful input they ever get. Email's easy. Phone, you never reach the member. Yes, we got your number. A phone call is more a yes-no. Are you in favor? Are you against it? If you want detail, you write a passionate letter. Someone might actually read it. And it's surprising. You think, well, they get a lot of input. A lot of members say they don't get enough. They will all say they don't get enough. They'd want to hear more. So don't discount your opinion. It'll be important to them. They want to hear. They do really, truly want to know. So I would really encourage that interaction.
Well, I praise letter writers, especially my hand.
The English major, yes.
And as long as we're talking English majors, let's talk about Shakespeare's tragedies, because the Farm Bill really is, well, it's shorter than Shakespeare's tragedies, but without Cliff's Notes, it's difficult. And I don't care if it's a farm organization or it's students. It's a complex problem, and the only way to address it is with a big axe and a hard swing, and take out a bit at a time. And you can, as in Shakespeare, you can skip some stuff and find the good parts, but whether we're talking as students or whether we're talking as my farm organizations, understanding the Farm Bill is key to, number one, maybe we escape the treadmill, because gee, didn't they say this last time? And I sometimes think if more of us were familiar with it, we just might escape the treadmill and let's try something different.
Very well. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Let's give our panelists and speakers a round of applause.